Welcome to Universal Truths with Mark Foltz, coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful downtown Birmingham, Alabama, and coming to you or speaking to you from my cute tiny home near Pensacola, Florida. And I am, of course, for those who are new to listening to me, I am a metaphysical person. I'm a working psychic, and I've been in uh, metaphysics really working since I was 18, and now I'm 60, going on 61. And so I cover all sorts of metaphysical and paranormal subjects, and also subjects that are close to my heart that I think other people can relate with. And so I try to dig into things that maybe other people just aren't talking about or they just don't know about. So we're going to try and cover some things tonight that I hope will be an interesting subject. And that is the past is alive in haunted antiques and furniture and dolls. And that is actually very true. To me, the past never dies. Everything that's happened, anything that we think that's put into our brains when we die, our brain records, up to about 3 million hours worth of information. So and it's recording while we're sleeping and while we're resting, and every second something is being recorded. And whether we remember it consciously, it's in there and it's retrievable at some point if we knew how. And we do know how to do little bits and pieces of it. But the thing about the past, the past is each person has their life and all of this recorded information. Like my mother lived to be 89 years old. That's all that information. And when she died, that information got downloaded. It's not gone. And it's not gone. It's just where we don't know where it is, but it's downloaded. But for psychics, sometimes we're able to access some of that kind of information where people have touched, people have thought, people have lived. And so, and think about how many just trillions and trillions and trillions of people have come and gone. So the thing of that consciousness is always there. And the consciousness that's it will never really go away. It may go away from sight, but it's never really gone. It's there somewhere in the universe. Its energy isn't destroyed. It is transitions. It just goes into another form. And it's very hard for us as functioning vehicles to understand, what other form that could be until we are in that situation. So I love thinking and looking at antiques and antique textiles and antique dolls, because antique dolls are a vessel. As far as, they're play toys and all that, but they're also vessels because dolls were not created to be playthings in the beginning. They were replicas of us. They were vessels to contain us or to contain energy like us or to represent us. And then eventually they became the Barbie of today. And, or the American Girl or whatever you want to, whatever your choice of doll is now. They were a totally different thing centuries ago. And the same thing with antiques. I consider myself a mirror and dresser whore. I don't know why, but in my bedroom, I have an old dresser from the 1840s, 1860s, with a beautiful little mirror. I have a low boy dresser a friend gave to me that has a beautiful mirror on it. And I have another mirror. I have a mirror fascination, and it's not because of looking at me or looking at something. I just find them beautiful. But the ones in my bedroom are not haunted. But I do have two very haunted mirrors, and my cousin has a great haunted mirror that she has in a shed because she will not put it in her house for good reason. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what can happen. Why do items get haunted? What makes them so interesting in that way? They sometimes have their own character. They have their own thought. They have their own connection, their own something attached to them sometimes. So and why, but then again, and if you have a problem with that and it's a problem to you, what you can possibly do to correct that if it's too much stimulation for you. So I actually have had pieces of furniture. Like I said, I have the two mirrors that are haunted, and one of them is delightfully haunted. I love it. I experience it weekly because it was given to me by a person who'd gotten it in another country, and it's one of those kind of pieces they've made for centuries that it's it's very similar to stuff that country had made for long time, so that it's hard to tell the age, but it's actually pretty old. And it has a spirit in it that I've seen the little tufts of her hair. It's like I put it up real high, and so she can't quite see over the bottom edge, but I've seen her hair, and very black hair, very pretty. But I put or we put vases on it. These cobalt things I got from Germany ages ago, about 40 years ago. And they're very pretty, but they have a definite pattern on them. And so you can see by the pattern how the vase is moving. So every week, the three vases, usually the ones on each end, they'll either turn the same way away, or they'll turn opposite directions, or they always turn something different. It's either one will turn or both will turn. And if it were a vibrational thing, the third one would turn too, the one in the middle, but it doesn't. So it's usually the ones on the end. And they'll twist and turn, and I'll turn them back, and then they turn again. And it's just kind of like a funny "I'm here" kind of thing. And I just think it's a hoot, And I've been up. I have insomnia, so I'll be up at night sometimes, and I'll sense when there's something going on in the mirror. And like I said, I've seen a little bit of who's in there. But I know it's not the way that I am trained and my energy is set up. My aura is a CAT scan. Everyone's is a CAT scan. So I can tell when something is not healthy, or it's a strange thing, or I should be worried about it, or if I need to do something with it. And it's benign. It's just an old spirit that's with that mirror. And it doesn't come out of the mirror. It's just in the mirror. And so and it apparently is happy. And, and it feels like a little game when we turn the vases and stuff. And people who are not metaphysical have come in and have noticed this happens. So it's just kind of like a little game. And it's not distressing or anything like that. I mean, if I saw a dead person looking out of it, real late at night, trying desperately to get to us or get out, that I would take care of that real quick. But this isn't what that is. Now, the other mirror I got out of an old dilapidated house that's now since been rescued and saved. But the house it was taken from, I think I got this in 2000. So I've had it 23 years, and it's now the frame is starting to fall apart. I've got to rescue that. But this mirror, the man who owned the mirror, all of his belongings, his partner, and he lived in this house. And so when the guy, he owns other houses, so he just closed this one up. Well, he put this guy's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful antiques in the basement, and they all rotted. And this mirror comes from that house, and it was just someone else had put it, in the dirt next to the door, and this is stuff that was being gotten rid of, and I just loved this mirror. It's what they call a rolling pin Victoria mirror. Actually, I have a headboard that matches it, and so now, but back then, I just thought it was beautiful, and I thought it was a shame it was being trashed because it had rotten damage at the bottom. So I took it home and fixed it up, and I put it in my hallway. Well, then, I one time when I was going through, I could see that there was this shaggy-haired, black-haired man in very bad physical health standing in the mirror. And so what happened was, the man who had died, who owned this stuff, he was so upset of them putting his beautiful antiques. And I'm not talking, like 1960s, 70s furniture. There were bedroom suits like from the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. There were these marble top pieces of furniture. There were all these beautiful textiles. There were all these beautiful little chairs. There were 5 million, just stuff everywhere. And he was upset. His things he had died. And so instead of someone enjoying his things, they had been put into the basement to rot. Just like he had been put in the ground, like we get buried, to rot. And he was not happy. So he was in this image in the mirror. And I thought, well, we're not going to put that in our bedroom. I put him in the hallway, and, he wasn't harmful or scary. It just was that, he just was unhappy how the things had happened with his belongings and his things. And since he was living in my house, he seemed to be okay with that, but he would appear in the mirror. And I thought, well, I put it where people wouldn't see that very often because it would be a little disturbing to them. And, if the spirits want to leave the mirror, they can. And I thought, well, if he becomes a problem, then I will make sure he gets released. But it's more of an essence of him. But what it is that was the remnants of him. The reason that mirrors get haunted a lot is because the spirits who are not ready to let go. In the Victorian era, they would cover the mirror with black cloth so that the spirit wouldn't see their reflection and get trapped in the mirror. Well, in a way, there's a kind of a thing to that because the spirit can still see itself. It can see what it's projecting. So this spirits, when they see the mirror, sometimes that's kind of like, well, I'm dead, but, physically, but I can still see myself. So this is a way to preserve who I am. So it's kind of like living. They can see themselves in the mirror. So they are able to access the glass and are able to project into the mirror. And in a way that keeps them alive and keeps them looking like what they were in the physical. And so I understand that. Now, sometimes you can get haunted mirrors that are very disturbing. My cousin Ellen has one. Well, she really has two of her own. She has a beautiful mantle she bought with a mirror, but there's a woman's spirit in it. But it's very sweet, happy. It enjoys where it's at. And her name is Margaret. And so, it likes, my cousin loves to decorate and everything. As long as she doesn't see a ghost, she's fine. Now, the other one, but they told me they could tell something was wrong to the mirror. So I came and looked at the mirror, and I went, well, yeah, but it's okay. And now the other mirror came from our very haunted grandparents' house, where they lived in Chattanooga in a downtown section in North Chattanooga that was haunted with this this guy who haunted the basement, and there was a little Southern Belle looking woman who would run around the house, and then this man's spirit would come from the basement and come through the house and try and pursue her. And my grandmother, who was very psychic, would see this ghost all the time, and she believed that the woman killed him to protect herself. Because the little ghost is running through the house, checking all the doors and all the windows, and then he comes in, there's noise, and then it stops. And my grandmother thought he was buried in the basement. And I'd seen him. He was very dead looking. I mean, he was very, when I was little and was going around the basement, he haunted the basement. And I saw this person look at me when I was about 6, and I saw him, and his skin looked like really, really dark leather. And, which I didn't know what color they turned when they mummify. But his eyes were just like black goo. But you could tell that they were aware and moving, but they were just black. And his hair was broken off and sticking up, and he was staring at me. And and then he saw me seeing him, and he disappeared. And then that was when I was 6. So 10 years later, I actually saw him and experienced him. And he was a very scary spirit. Well, this mirror was in my grandmother's bedroom where a lot of haunting would go on. And my cousin got it from an uncle who said, because she had painted it, the frame when she was little, and he gave it to her. And nobody wanted this mirror, and it's beautiful. It's very unique. And but she started having it in her guest room, and people started talking about, this guy. And then I stayed in there one time, and I went, well, you can see this shadowy, spooky person. And so it's a remnant of the one that lived in my grandparents' house. And so she was not going to have that, because she had been with me one time in the house. And when she was young, when her mother died, my grandparents kept her for a while. And they made a painting area for her in the basement. She was too scared to go down there and paint, because he was in there. You could just feel it. And so she would act like she went outside to paint, and then she'd come back in, and all this. But she refused to go in that basement. As most adults later on would admit, they were scared of the basement. And but she had been in the house one time with me, and she was staying in my grandmother's room. My grandmother had died, and we were watching my grandfather. And I was across the way in the living room, and you could see me sleeping on the couch. And this big, ugly 50s lamp, it was just ugly, heavy thing, lifted up and threw across the tables and landed on me. She saw it. So, and I woke up going, why am I wearing this lamp? And she saw it, and, but she was scared of what was in that house, which rightfully she should be. And so this mirror comes from that house. And so it's in her house now. So she got to where, after a couple complaints, she put it in a shed. And sometime I'm going to help her. We're going to cleanse it and get rid of this, send this spirit on. You're not getting rid of the spirit, you're moving them on. And because it needs to go on. The house that was there has been destroyed, and now it's a condo, I think. And I thought, ooh, I wouldn't live in that place, because that spirit, it's so strong. When they were tearing down the house, we could see where the well had been underneath there, and that's where my grandmother thought he had been put, that he'd been buried, but we believed he had been put in a well. And this would have been, long, 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 long time ago. So I wouldn't live in that house if you gave it to me. But anyway, we've got to go to a break, but when we come back, we'll continue this conversation about haunted furniture and antiques and dolls. Though all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Paratalk Radio is your one-stop for all things paranormal, the unknown, and the supernatural. Join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central for discussions and guests on topics such as ghosts, hauntings, Bigfoot, UFOs, and more. This broadcast is rated M for mature and intended for listeners over 16 on paratalkradio.com.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz, coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful downtown Birmingham, Alabama, and talking to you from my cute little tiny home in Pensacola, Florida, or near Pensacola, Florida. And, of course, we're talking tonight about haunted furniture and antiques and dolls and things like that, and how the past really lives on. And I was talking about, when we went to break, about my grandparents' house that was so haunted. And when it was torn down a few years ago, they built a condo on it, and that spirit was so strong that lived in that house. I just know it's living in the condo. And it's very, very angry, very ugly, and very scary. And very scary looking. If you could see what he looks like, it's just a nightmare. I have to paint him sometimes so people get an idea. And it's very, I wouldn't live in that condo if you gave me one. And it's on a hill, so it's in a fancy place in Chattanooga that wasn't fancy when I was young, but it was fancy now. but you couldn't give it to me if you tried. And I am going to continue talking about, so even though the house was haunted, items from the house ended up being haunted. And so my cousin has a mirror and things like this, and so we'll take care of that at some point. Now, I was very young when I started realizing how spirits could attach to things, not just being a spirit itself, that they could be something that they love, something that they were attached to, it's kind of like picking up a phone and calling them. By dealing with it, touching it, having it in your atmosphere, it kind of calls them because they have their essence in it, and that's like a fiber optic thread to them. So when you're thinking of them or messing with the piece of furniture, or even if you don't know who the spirit is, it can be a thing where it attracts the spirit. So we love. When I was young, oh my God, we had such great antique stores in Chattanooga. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, before people really collected antiques, they just looked at it as old junk. And so in the 60s, there was a place called the Swap Shop and things like that. I loved going in there. And now as a psychic, I wish that it was the kind of place, oh my, I wish there were stores like it now. You could just walk in there and it was stuff that it was just crowded with things from the early 1800s on up. And a lot of it was broken down and, lots of living in it. And up to modern things. But even the modern things were interesting. And this guy would just people would bring and sell things to him like a junk store. And he just had it, here and there. And you walked through, and it was a tall store, and it had antiques, ancient stuff just all around the top, And one time he even had a casket with a window opening in it, God knows where he got that. And but it was from the 1800s, and you could go in there with $10 and come out with a handful of things. Because nobody cared in those days. They just didn't care. And then when they start going, oh, well, it could be worth money, then it became a different experience. And the kind of things you could get, now something that you could get for $10, they were wanting $150 for. And I see that a lot in stores now. I go in and I pick up something that I paid $1 for in the 60s. And they're wanting $80 for it or $100 for a dollar item. And, I mean, and of course things always changed like that. I mean, when I was a child, you could buy plastic models for, and it was a big deal to build models in the 60s. So for $1 or $1, I remember when they went up to $1.99, which doesn't sound like much, but if you don't have that, so it still was something to have to get. But models that I built, that I had, that I got for $1.99, are selling for $300 and $400 now. So big jump, big difference. And a lot of people now think, even if it's broken, they want to charge more than retail price for it. And sometimes they'll get it and sometimes they won't. But right now I see a lapse in people being interested in the Victorian antiques. They're more interested in the antiques of when they were young. So all of this mid-century stuff that I hated when I was a kid, the futuristic furniture, and which was actually fairly uncomfortable in our house, the ones that we had that were futuristic. My mother, and into plastic covered couches and things. So antiques now that people would want, because once it's over 50 years. It's pretty much an antique. And we had some ugly stuff from the 70s and 60s. There were some beautiful things, but we didn't have those. We had the ugly stuff. And I remember this couch that was this green naugahyde. And even though it was covered, and they covered things in plastic sometimes for a little while. My mother did that when she had 4 kids. I hated that. You'd stick to it. It's like, and so uncomfortable. And stick furniture, the big legs and things like this, I mean, it was all weird. But now people, run for that. And because they remember that stuff from the 60s and 50s and 70s and 80s. And a lot of people are always, it seems like you're always fascinated with the generation before you. I was always felt like I lived before, but when I was little, I thought I really was fascinated with the 50s. And I felt like that was my era in the modern world. Before that, then I feel like I was an 1880s person. And I believe it thoroughly still in my clothing choice sometimes. I do wear a lot of, high collars and things like that, but I have a love for antiques. And, but in my day, people were buying antiques very cheaply. So, you would take home things that, had essence in them and you didn't know what was wrong. And it could bring ghosts and things like that into your house. And I've had people who've bought furniture and had to call me and say, "There's something going on. Can you take care of this? Look at this. Tell me what's going on." And they would just accidentally bring kind of like a straggling spirit who was hanging on to the antique they've got, that they brought in. And now that antique stores are too expensive, people go to thrift stores. Well, in the thrift stores, you're buying a lot of stuff now that people, when they die and things like that, they just have the Goodwill come get them, the thrift store come get them, get their clothes, get all their stuff. And some of those people's spirits are kind of like, I wasn't finished with that. And you're going in there, you're picking up their sweater, you're picking up their table, their dresser, their bed. You don't know any history of it. You're just buying it and taking it home. And when you do that, sometimes you get a surprise. And not that that's a bad thing. It just means, if there's if there's a connection, you have to first think about, well, that person, it can be the person, it can be the essence, it can be the spirit, or it can just be kind of like an embedded information of the person that something you're doing, your aura is making it replay something or kick into action, and then you see something like a record playing. Some of it's pre-recorded. Some of it is actual. I look at things and have to go, is that a pre-recorded kind of energy? Is it thinking? Is it assessing? Is it something that it just needs to be cleaned and that'll get rid of that essence because it's just not been cleaned or disengaged? Like the haunted mirror I have in the back room that I don't have out, that has the man's image in it. That kind of is a consciousness. And I'm actually going to probably find a home for that pretty soon. For somebody who wants that. Who wants that, to give him a good home and let him be. And then if he wants to leave, he can leave. He stayed with the mirror because he kind of stays with the mirror. But he's kind of a pre-recorded essence in there with a little bit of consciousness. The one in my front room is conscious because I'll see them looking out at me ever so often, trying to poke their head up. They're so short, they can't get up enough to look out the mirror. And then there's some things you just pick up that have stuff in them and stuff on them. And that's what you have to decide. Do I cleanse that? Does it need an exorcism? Or what? So, I haven't had as much trouble with people getting things in their belongings. The last one was, of course, my cousin getting this mantle, which is um, an old, probably an 1890s, 1900s mantle with a mirror in it. It's beautiful. And she got it for a phenomenal price. And I think the reason she got it for a phenomenal price was because it had a ghost in it. And the girl was moving, and she just did not want to take us with her. And but it likes my cousin's house, so it's not giving her any trouble. And they put little things up, to so that to make sure she ain't gonna see something. But it is a beautiful, beautiful mantle, and the spirit attached to it is very lovely. It's not a situation where I would say this is dire. She's going to come out of the mirror and haunt you. I have seen images of spirits that are using mirrors as a kind of a portal to come out of, to come into the home. Now that, depending upon what that intent is, then I have cleansed those before. So it's very doable. It's not rocket science for any in any means anyway. It's just techniques to disengage or to cleanse or to get rid of that vibration. Now, uh, I love antiques, and I have an antique actual urn. I've talked about it before, that I got at a garage sale back 30, 40 years ago. Well, let me think. Somewhere around like 83, 84, something like that. And I saw this Art Nouveau urn, ashes urn, something people were buried in. And I got it for $25. My mother bought it for $25 for me at the time. I didn't have money on me. And this is kind of like, what you could find, today. And this woman ran up and tried to grab it out of my hands after it was in my hands. And you can see who won because I took it with me. But she was like, I saw that first from across there. And I'm like, well, I got my hands on it first, lady. So I won. That's like the old story of going on Black Friday, to the stores and, coming home going, oh, the kicking and the screaming and the scratching. I hope I didn't hurt anybody too bad. But I had to have this vase. And it's sitting in my front room very proudly. It's a beautiful 1890s urn that was a lady's urn. And it has a marble bottom. It has the handles are vines, and it's Art Nouveau, and it's got these flowers and vines and birds all over it that stand out. It's all sculpted. It's beautiful. And a lot of people would have been turned off that it was an urn, but it was stunning. But I brought it home, and I thought, well, we'll see what happens. But I've never had a problem with it. It was so old by the time I got it. I think someone had dumped the ashes years and years and years before, and then they kept the urn because it was beautiful. And it's just an amazing piece because I collect little memento mori things. Now, my friend Teal Craig collects memento mori. And what people don't understand about that, the Victorians, they were death was a huge, huge, huge part of their life. And mourning was a huge part of their life. And remembering the deceased was, everything evolved around that. And, you had year-long wearing of black. You had, you could have jewelry made from their hair. You could have things carved about them, cameos. You could have rings made. You could have, if your child died, you could have a doll made, which I have one of those. And we'll talk about in the show as we go. And you could have a doll made to represent your child, put the hair on the doll, and you would have the doll to remember the child, but it also was the essence of the child. And the one that I have, which is an effigy doll, her name is Elizabeth Agnes and Brown, and they called her Lizzie Brown, the child that it was named after. And she's buried in New Jersey. She died in 1880, and she was 9 months old. And of course, such devastating things happen to the mothers and the fathers and the families, and it's anyone who's ever suffered that kind of loss. Sometimes you just can't let go, and helping them through this, sometimes these dolls kind of helped with that sorrow. And she held this doll for, it's a wax doll, blue eyes, and the hair of the little girl. And she held her for many, many years, and 143 years ago. And the doll has come to me, and the doll is still very activated. And I have her in the store I work at Live and Let Live, and I have a cabinet of my dolls. And her eyes, usually, they're this very unusual spiral, hand-blown glass spiral eyes. So when you look at them very closely, you can see this detail in the eyes. I mean, very, very unique work. I just don't see how back then, they did what they did to make all these beautiful things. But she is, her eyes are very pale usually, but when the spirit is active, and she wants someone's attention, and she's usually drawn to mother energies. And if she sees someone who's suffering, who's a mother energy, suffering over the loss of a child or just upset, she'll focus on them, and they'll go, that doll is staring at me. And the doll shimmies on its own, sometimes trying to get to people. And every so often, I don't do it very often because she's so fragile, but I will let someone hold her. But it has to be a special case, because she's so fragile. They're so rare. These kind of dolls, there used to be thousands of them. Now there's just a few. And they've been relegated to the weird, macabre history of the Victorian era. But she'll want to get to someone. And I will let them hold her, and her eyes will turn bright blue and violet, and they feel like a huge weight has been taken off of them. Because that doll, the energy from the mother holding that doll and putting her sorrow and things into it, she gave that consciousness to that doll, and that doll, that's its purpose, is to help people and take the stress off them. And she's the little crown jewel of my collection because people love her. She's scary looking because she's wax and she's been very, very damaged. Half of her face is missing. She looks very classically like a scary doll. I put her on the cover of my book Dolls, from the Darkest Corner, about people who treat doll bodies as or corpses as dolls, or that kind of thing. So I have her face on the front of it, and but she is a healing tool, and she's drawn to people, and people are drawn to her. Now, some people are very scared of her. There's a psychic who works in the store who's terrified of these dolls, and they're not going to hurt her. They just are there, but they're intense. And, and actually she's the sweetest, kindest thing. Now, the one that I have had to talk about that people want, they want the Annabelle story and kind of thing. And like I said, the only one I've ever had to deal with that was that kind of energy that almost landed on me. A friend of mine at the time, years and years and years ago, someone had Judith that I helped, we lived together, and someone had given her a doll because she liked dolls, and it had been damaged and repaired, but it was very angry. And I would hear her talk. She would tell me, said it hated her, and she kept trying to make friends with it. And I'd hear her arguing with it, going, "Why are you being so mean?" And eventually I quit hearing her talk to it, but she had put it in the basement to get it away from her. And I didn't know what to do with it at that time, and we were having other things going, and we were about to part ways. And I understand why the doll was mad at her, because she could be very maddening. And but I moved away 50 miles away from there, and which Judith didn't know where I went. And I left certain things in the house, and that was something I didn't take with me. I thought somebody else would find her and take her and keep her. And about 3 or 4 days later, I walk out on my back locked porch in the country, and there's sitting that doll. And I thought, heck no, it ain't happening, because she didn't like me either. And I knew it. So I got on eBay, and I found her someone who really wanted her. I took good pictures of her, dressed her up pretty, and found her a home. And she apparently liked it because she didn't come back, because she was quite capable of transferring herself, which they call that an apport. And so somebody has her somewhere, but if she doesn't like it, she can get herself out of the situation, because she does do that. But I thought, I'm not having that in my house. I'm not having that where I have to keep one eye open. And so we took care of that situation. But anyway, we have to go to a break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. So all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz. I am coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful downtown Birmingham, Alabama, and talking to you from my beautiful tiny home near Pensacola, Florida. And we are talking haunted antiques and dolls and things like that, and how the past lives through these things, because nothing ever really does. And even though we think, the item, something like, a person or an item, even if it's gone physically, if it's been disintegrated or it's just not in our sight, that it no longer has consciousness, and it still exists somewhere, somehow. The science can probably prove eventually in the future how just because it's gone doesn't mean it's not somewhere in some form. And I think that's, we wade through all that stuff all the time anyway, and then it degrades, and then, sinks down into the earth and into the dimensional layers and dimensional things the electromagnetic bands we call dimensions. And because that's a simply complex kind of thing that we have many, many levels of dimensions that we live in, live on, walk through, go through the veils all the time, that we walk on and in bed with our energies. And so, to me, it's not very strange to think that anything that has energy in it, it's never quite gone. It just is repurposed or transitions or transforms. But that image, that form, especially if it has an electromagnetic field, because the electromagnetic fields keep like plasma forms in shape. So, there's very possible that a lot of things still exist. Even people have seen houses that have been torn down, burned down, gone for decades, reappear, visually, like a haunting. And so, it could be recorded energy. It could be, could in itself, because of the material houses are built out of, wood holds vibration. It was a living thing. And it can hold vibrations and frequency. Plaster, in a very unusual way, because in the old days, when they made plaster walls, they put horsehair in it. Well, horsehair has energy. It has the energy of the living being put into a hard substance. And a lot of times, the plaster has kind of a quartz element to it. The stone around the house that it can be built up has quartz, which quartz is known to record frequency and energy. And when I was young, radios and TVs had quartz tubes because they could hold a frequency and send a frequency. So what's the difference? If your house has quartz in it, through stone, or even in the concrete or whatever's in it, it's recording some kind of energy. The wood records, the stone records, the fabric. Fabric is made out of all sorts of materials now. I mean, a lot of synthetics, so probably not as much holding on. But when you talk about silk, which comes from a living creature that they killed to get the silk, the moth, the butterfly, the cotton, which was a living plant that had lived in the sun and took vibration and grew and responded. So your fabrics, your textiles, the clothing they wore 100 years ago and 50 years ago, that very well, they were living beings put into that material. So why wouldn't it record? Why wouldn't it take vibration? Why wouldn't it take essence? Because fabric absorbs. We use fabric for rags to absorb things. So think about it like this. The material that you wear absorbs your essence and frequency. So everything has a little bit of that. And so, I have a wonderful quilt that's haunted that is from 1839. It's my grandfather's family made it. It was beautiful. My grandmother, the one he married, she didn't like people, but she loved certain things, and this she loved because it was beautifully done, and it was a crazy quilt that was beautifully embroidered. And you could tell groups of people did it, and it was from Texas, so it had a lot of Texas elements, like horseshoes, because they were on a farm and all that stuff. But there were little potato bugs, there were little butterflies and all sorts of bugs and spider webs with a little spider on it, and things like this, and just charming, wonderful things. So I took it to my cousin's house, one has the haunted mirror. And she's very sensitive, as I am, as far as to spirits. So I had never really got to spread this quilt out. Now, when I got it, it has this. I remember my grandmother Fultz showing me, said the lace around this. It's handmade lace, and it looks machine made, but it's handmade lace, about 3 or 4 inches wide, of this kind of a burgundy handmade lace that's 183 years old, and it looks brand new. It's not. But in 1939 my grandmother put a new backing on it and took it and won an award at a country fair kind of thing. So she loved this thing. She loved it, and she was a great sewer herself. So my mother had it, and it had been in a trunk since we got it in the 70s or 60s, and nobody else would have really wanted it. I wanted it. So my mother gave it to me, and when she gave it to me, the lace was coming apart. It was sewed across one edge, and the other part of it was undone. So I went to my cousin's house to show her this quilt, and I took it out and laid it out. It was around pretty close to Christmas. And or after Christmas, excuse me, because we were going to get together and watch that show Wednesday. So we were watching Wednesday, whenever it came out, and I had the quilt spread out. We were oohing and awing over it, and then I folded it back and put it. I realized something was different with it. I just couldn't tell what, but I put it back in the bag and had the bag sitting in between us, and we were watching this show. And this really freaky noise happens. And she goes, "What was that?" And I went, "I don't know." We had to go through the house and check everything. And then we heard something else, And then after it was over, watching the show, it wasn't the show. It was, whatever that noise was. She kept asking me about it. And I said, "Oh, I bet it's the quilt." Because, the quilt hadn't really been spread out in over 100 years, really. But she looked at me really, really uniquely and took her foot and pushed the bag toward me. And I said, "Maybe I'll leave it here with you," and slid it back towards her. And she says, "I think not." And she slid it back to me. And I took it home. And then that night about, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I was in here by myself. And there was a knock at my bedroom door. And I said, I understand. And it was the spirit attached to the quilt who we had basically called because we were oohing and awing over their work. And they had put all this, hundreds of hours into it. It was just incredible. And she just was letting us know, she was happy. And that we loved it. And I'm going to put it up in my house. But my cousin is, if I say I'm bringing the quilt, she's like, "I don't think so." And but it's beautiful. It's like all of these, it's closer to 200 years old than it is anything. And there's all these velvets and brocades and, shattered silk and just amazing handwork. That you just don't see anymore. But see, if my mother had not given it to me, a lot of things that were at my mother's house went to thrift stores. After when they got what they wanted, my brother had to sell everything, so we had to put money towards my mother's care and end of life issues. And so we, sold what was left. And if I hadn't gotten it, it would more than likely have been sold. well, somebody in a thrift store would have grabbed it and taken it home, and then found out they had a ghost. And and there was haunted items in my mother's house that I didn't take with me for different reasons, because they had a lot of sadness attached to them, and I didn't want to be sad, And I thought, well, it's time to let some of those go, and I didn't think my brother would sell them to the thrift stores. I thought, maybe the girls or, his girls, his children would get them. And they got sold to a thrift store. And I thought, oh no. There are things that they got sold that definitely had things going. Because my mother had several items, which we'll cover in the next part. But she had a couple of pieces of furniture I didn't want to have in my house. They were beautiful, but I didn't want them in my house because of other things. And and my mother was having experiences with them about the year before she died. She was having problems with one piece of furniture, but I thought it was sweet, but it scared her. And that was my grandmother's, this chair from her mother's, that it moved on its own and she'd smell roses when it moved and pulled itself up to her bedside, and it freaked her out. But it was my grandmother's chair, and I loved my grandmother. But it was there were so many things attached to that chair that were not pleasant, that made it where it wasn't something I wanted to bring home, just because of the bad things. But it freaked my mother out, and her sister also, who was older than my mother, when it came time for about 6 months before she died, there was a painting of my grandfather, their father, Pappy. We call Pappy, Francis Swearingen, and this painting of him from 1896 as a baby, and she was in the room, and it came off the wall and landed in the middle of the room without breaking, and it's from 1896. And it freaked her out because she really couldn't handle, spirit communications and that kind of thing. And I just felt like, it was him letting her know he was close by. And but it freaked her out. She had my mother come up and sit with her, and she was really, really freaked. And I think that's when she let my mother have that picture, and I have that picture now. And it is, I like that kind of stuff, but, a lot of people don't. And my aunt really couldn't handle it. My mother really couldn't handle it. My mother and their mother was the biggest psychic I'd ever known, and or the best accurate psychic I'd ever known. And so they would just freak out over this kind of stuff. So it was pretty funny, though. But anyway, I will continue. We have to go to a break. But when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. I'll tell you about the death chair. And so all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. Today, the top U.S. and Russian diplomats met for the first time in a year, but it was just for 10 minutes on the sidelines of an international gathering in India. And the State Department isn't raising expectations of more dialogue anytime soon, as we hear from NPR's Michelle Kellerman.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he urged Russia to rejoin a key arms control treaty, release an American detainee, and stop its aggression against Ukraine. State Department spokesman Ned Price says it was a brief encounter.
We're always going to take advantage of opportunities to convey our interests in manners that are clear and direct, whenever we can.
Secretary Blinken did not meet with his Chinese counterpart, who was also attending the G20 meeting in India. Both China and Russia refused to agree to language in a joint statement from this G20 gathering about Russia's war in Ukraine. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
The House Ethics Committee says it's launching an investigation into actions by embattled New York Congressman George Santos. The committee looking at reported lies and embellishments about his resume as well as his personal life that has drawn intense scrutiny, including among some fellow lawmakers. Bipartisan members of the Ethics Committee voted unanimously to establish an investigative subcommittee to look into the allegations. Santos has already removed himself from congressional committees. A constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights in Ohio is a step closer to appearing before voters in November. As Ohio Public Radio's Joe Engels reports, Ohio's Attorney General has certified petition summary language for the ballot measure.
Attorney General Dave Yost says the summary language was a fair and truthful statement of the proposed amendment. Pro-choice Ohio's Kelly Copeland says she's pleased and thinks there's pent-up support for this amendment to guarantee abortion rights in Ohio.
As we demonstrated just 10 days ago, we collected a record number of signatures in a record amount of time.
Copeland says 1,000 signatures were needed to start the process. They got 7,000 of them over one weekend. After getting approval from another state panel, Copeland's group will need to collect nearly 414,000 valid signatures by July 5th to put the issue before voters in November. For NPR News, I'm Joe Ingles in Columbus.
The number of people filing first-time jobless claims took a dip last week. Initial claims for unemployment benefits falling by 2,000 to a seasonally adjusted 190,000 for the week ending February 25th. Labor Department says it was the seventh straight week that claims remained below 200,000. Continued strength in the jobs market, fueling some concerns the interest rate setting Federal Reserve, which is trying to tamp down inflation, may keep raising rates for a longer period of time. Stocks gained ground on Wall Street today. The Dow was up 341 points. The Nasdaq rose 83 points. You're listening to NPR. The major carriers continue to make safety improvements, especially in terms of overall accidents or crashes. But one thing that remains a problem, apparently, are accidents due to turbulence. The latest example is the Lufthansa flight from Texas to Germany that ran into rough air over Tennessee yesterday, had to be diverted to Dulles International Airport outside Washington. 7 people were taken to the hospital. Experts say they fully expect climate change will make the turbulence problem worse. Wildfires in the northern boreal forests released a record-high amount of climate-warming emissions in 2021. NPR's Nathan Rott reports researchers warn they're a ticking time bomb of carbon.
Boreal forests cover huge parts of Alaska, Canada, and Russia, and they're seeing increased wildfire as global temperatures rise, particularly at higher latitudes. Typically, wildfires in boreal forests only account for about 10% of the planet's wildfire-related carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon dioxide being the largest contributor to global warming. In 2021, though, fires in boreal forests made up 23% of the world's total fire-related emissions, the new research finds. The increase is part of a worrying longer-term trend, the researchers say, that boreal forests could start contributing more carbon to the atmosphere, exacerbating global warming. Nathan Rott, NPR News.
Crude oil futures prices rose slightly today, boosted by some rebound in terms of China's economy. Oil ended the session up 47 cents a barrel to settle at $78.16 a barrel in New York. I'm Jack Speer, NPR News in Washington.
On the Code Switch podcast, conversations about race don't start and stop with the news cycle. We know that race is always relevant, and we have new topics, new voices, and new stories for you every single week. Listen to the Code Switch podcast from NPR.
Welcome back to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz, and I'm coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful downtown Birmingham, Alabama, and talking to you from my cute tiny home near Pensacola, Florida. Now, tonight we're talking about haunted antiques and furnitures and dolls and things and, clothing and all that. Anything that can take an energy has energy, and it has its own energy. It's life force. And even plastic things, which dolls are sometimes made out of plastic, they can become vessels because we have a tendency to be able to embed things with our energy anyway. So, the story I was telling before I went to commercial, my mother, she had a chair that my granny, my mother's mother, who I loved very much, but very much the kind of grandparents you want, that were sweet, they were kind to me, considerate. They lived until their 80s, but when the day that my granny died, my grandfather had gone to get her something to eat, and she sat down and she had a heart attack and died, and in this specific chair. Now, when I would have to stay with my grandfather and take care of him, and I was young, it happened on my 16th birthday, the eve of my 16th birthday. So, for the next 40 years almost after my 16th birthday, it would be, my mother would go, "Happy birthday, Mama died today." So it was always embedded in sadness. My mother mourned for years, and it was real sad. But the chair became, of course, it was in a very haunted house. When I stayed in the house, I was comfortable staying in the room with the chair and the couch and all that. I wasn't comfortable staying in her bedroom. And and they were always trying to force me to go in her bedroom, and I didn't like it, and I didn't know at the time how haunted it was and all that. It was before I started getting the crap scared out of me by little Civil War women running around the house, or the man that would chase her, or hearing, picking up the phone and hearing someone in the other end of the house pick it up and going, like rotten vocal cords. And that's how that house was. And this chair came from that house. Well, when my grandparents both died, their family had to split up stuff, and there was a lot of fights over things. And that chair was one of those things. They really fought over that chair, Mama's chair she died in. And so my brother called it the death chair. And the aunt who got it was a real jerk, and she would really rub it in their nose that she won that chair. And they would always fight and stuff, but they'd always get together later. But they always had these grudges, and that was a big contention. Who got the chair, and eventually my mother had it, she had it covered, and then later on my mother had it recovered when my mother got it, after my aunt died. And my aunt, who was so freaked out over this kind of stuff, I was really surprised she wanted to keep it. But it was like an item to piss off the other sisters. They were really into this stuff. What, Mama? But it was something important to them. And so my mother, when she got it after her sister died, the last sister, the meanest sister, and Mama put it by her bed. So before my mother's health had gone down, it was in the process of going down where we had to do something. And I was living in Florida, and she lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she had a great pension that my father had left. So we were able to find a place to place her that was fantastic. They fed her. They took care of her. I saw them. I saw what they did. It wasn't a nursing home. It was a assisted living facility. They babied her. And it has since sold hands and has gone downhill terribly. But the place that she was at, it was fantastic. And they loved her. And my mother could be very lovable, especially to other people. And so they loved her. And they babied her, and when she died, they just cried their eyes out, and it broke my heart. And but about a year, 6 months before we had to go into this situation, my mother had that chair sitting by her bed, and it was just before her sister died, and that chair pulled over about 3 or 4 feet, and Mom said she could smell roses, and the chair pulled up to her bed, and it freaked her out. And so she was scared to have the chair in her bedroom anymore. And I was like, well, Mama, that's Granny. That's your mama. She's coming to let you know she's around. And they had been around, because they were watching for her sister who was getting ready to go, who was in her 90s, kind of thing. And then when Mama was in this facility and I was sitting with her, she started seeing them and talking to them, and all of them were dead. All of them. And the ones that she was talking to her sister, Red, and Becky, and I think Martha. And she would ask them if it hurt to die, and they were telling her no, which I said, it's true. It doesn't hurt to die. The only uncomfortable you have is the physical part trying to do its thing. And and then I saw my grandfather wearing his little fedora. I saw his shadow zip into her room where she was at. I thought, they are cramming in there. I knew him and Granny were in there. But I thought, this is their moment. This is their time. I'm going to let them all have time with her, because they start to gather when they know you're getting ready to die. And I was trying to help my mother get to that point. And, but, and to be honest, before we had considered the facility, I offered my mother to move her down here, and I would have moved her in my own house and taken care of her myself, but she didn't want to leave Chattanooga. And she stayed there, and this place was fantastic. But, of course, then my mama, she passed. She wasn't suffering. She said she wasn't in pain, but she was holding on because she hadn't talked to... we knew she was hanging on for something. We just didn't know what. And the nurses said, well, she's waiting for someone to call her and tell her they're okay. And so I called the people that were not there and had her put the phone up to her. She couldn't talk. And when she heard my sister and my nephew, my nephew was so challenged, but he was so devastated he just couldn't come see her. And they said they loved her, and as she said, she made a little noise. And I said she understood. And so that night she died. And afterwards, of course, everyone, had something. We, made sure everyone had something of Mama's. And, but most of the things I got from my mother don't seem to be haunted. The things that I do have that are haunted are the quilt. And I didn't take the desk chair. And I thought maybe one of the nieces or somebody would like it, but nobody wanted the desk chair, and it went to a thrift store. And so the desk chair is in someone's home now, and good luck on that. Because of all the fighting and fussing they had done over that, it had gone beyond thinking about it as my granny's symbol. The only reason that it stood out for that is, when it moved and pulled up to my mother's bed, it was my grandmother who knew. She knew it was my grandmother's chair, and it was my grandmother saying, it's me, I'm here. And that I thought was cool, but I just had this feeling I didn't want the chair, because of all the fighting and the energy and the ruckus that had been put in. I felt like there was so much bad energy put on it that we just let that go. So someone else out there, you got a haunted death chair. Nobody was dying sitting in it. It's not a curse or anything, but it but you have to think about that when you buy antiques. people could have died on that furniture. They could have lived on that furniture, like beds and couches and things, but they could have died in that chair. My grandmother died in that chair. When you're buying their clothes, I've seen people take, things and send them to thrifts that, I thought, ooh, I don't know that, you don't think about it when you're buying the stuff, because I buy a lot of clothing from thrift stores, because, you find unique, one-of-a-kind kind of things there, but you probably buying someone's a dead person's shirts, their shoes, like I said, anything that they touch, you don't know that if it was something they put energy into or built or did, you're taking that energy and you're taking a risk sometimes, taking it in. All you have to do is mostly cleanse it. Find some Florida water and spritz on it, or sage it, or use both, though, because you have to use both to really cleanse. If you use sage and don't use the element of water and salt and all that, then it doesn't seem to always disengage everything. If you get a haunted mirror, you can take, I would get some Florida water. It's an actual thing. I like the Florida water. I would wash it down with the Florida water and sage it, or I would take a bowl of water, put 3 pinches of salt in it, light up my head, see the light go into your finger on your right hand, and stick it in the water. Light it up with your energy, and then wash it down with that. Wash it down with the vinegar. Sage the crap out of it. And the same thing for furniture. If it's wood will take being washed. They spent sometimes hundreds of years, soaking up water and being in the elements. Wash down the furniture. As long as it's washable, cleanable, smudgeable, do it and get rid of some of that stuff. If you feel like it would damage it, then don't do that. Just wait and see. But if it's something that you brought in and you go and you start getting activity like the next day, then duh, check it out, see what happens. I suggest turning the lights out, sitting in your house, and watching to see what's going on. Sometimes you'll get to see what's going on, and watch the mirrors, watch the things, because it's just life. Sometimes it's just a replay of the past. Sometimes you're just in a very interesting way. You're experiencing the past currently. You've activated it and it's replaying. When you remodel a house and you're pulling down old wallpaper, or you're pulling down the plaster with the hair in it, with the horsehair, or you're tearing up the floorboards, or whatever you're doing, all of that contains energy. Plaster contains the energy of not only what was in it, but people putting the painting in it and putting the paper over it, or living in it, living in the room and having energy and the energy going into the plaster. And it's energy that's recorded in there, separate from ghost. And when you start to remodel and you pull the paper down, you release energy, and then your aura perceives it. Or you knock down the plaster, well, that releases the dust, which releases the energy that was contained within the 100 years. I'm interested in old houses, so think about an old house that's 120 years old. You knock the plaster down, you got 120 years worth of energy and vibration and living released, and you're picking it up. Or at ghosts that are in the home. Sometimes the remodeling will activate it. And they will go, the energy that's being released is from their era. So it's vibrating to them. So it's like putting a needle on a record. It's just replaying what it was. Or if there's a ghost in the house, a spirit in the house, and you bring in an antique that they like or that they vibrate to, then it'll kick up spirit activity. Or you bring in a strange ghost into the house where you have a ghost. I've had that happen where they're like, no, I don't want that in my house. And that's funny. I have had that happen. Where it's like, the warring ghosts, they didn't want to be in each other's presence or being offended. And it's not necessarily that the ghost or whatever was really attached to the thing permanently, that, they felt you caress, buying it, caressing it, cleaning it, and it activates them, and then they come to see where it went. I want to see where it went. I want to see if it got a good home. And if they see it's got a good home and they ain't worried about it anymore, sometimes they just go, oh, whatever. And if it's a residual energy, it will die down. If it's a spirit, then it will let you know, and you can do other things to move it on. If it's an actual all-out haunting kind of thing, then you'll have to see, is it a good haunting or a bad haunting? Is it something I really need to leave alone and let be and be part of the character? Because I think a lot of haunted things have character. And which lots of character. Sometimes they have too much character. Now, if that character interferes with my life, then we have to reconsider that character trait there. But when you're buying the antiques, now people are buying old stuff, but they're not buying the stuff that I'm into, which is, I went into an antique store here called La Prissy Hen, and it's vintage and antiques. But they had there was a booth, and this woman was selling the antique stuff in there. Very, 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 very affordable. And I got this gorgeous 1890s Nippon-looking vase covered in roses, all this gorgeous color. And I got it for like $3 or $4. It was really incredible. And I went back and got another one, a portrait vase that was like $20, and I have that in my store for sale because it's just beautiful. But it has the lady portrait, and I thought somebody who's into something beautiful to represent the feminine energy, it's perfect. So, but it's this Victorian lady with this beautiful hair down around her shoulders and this beautiful hand-painted gold work on top of the picture, which has been applied or hand-painted to the vase. And it was $20. And, there was so much, you couldn't make it. You couldn't make a new one like it. You couldn't even buy the slip to make the vase for $20. And it's gorgeous. But it's antique, and I brought it home. And I have brought home things that I thought, I brought home one or two things that I had to go, well, maybe not. And then I found them new homes, or I cleansed them, or released it, or try. But you just have to be conscious because for me, some of it's interesting and can be cool. You don't want it to be detrimental or bring trouble into your house. And there are people who have bad experiences, and I will cover that when I come back, because in a minute we have to go to a break. But at the next section, I'll talk about a friend who has a piece of furniture that really is a piece of death furniture. And, people are too spooked by it. So now we're going to a break, and so all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Warning, the following message does not necessarily reflect the views of WBHM-DB or its hosts, guests, listeners, or of any functioning adult in general. In fact, Frank should probably seek professional help. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi there, Frank Lee here. I thought that I would spend a few moments telling you about the positivity from the network here. The overall message of para-unity and happiness, and how everyone here wants to get along with everyone out there, and how everything is just wonderful. Wait, Cat's not looking. Okay, I've got something to really tell you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what's really going on. Honestly, all that being nice and positive crap was kind of hurting my soul, as dark as it is. So, what's really happening? You see it all the time. Everybody and their brother out there has a paranormal team because they watched a couple of episodes of Ghost Hunters or some crap like that. So they go and they spend half their mortgage payment on tools and things that light up that they don't understand. And then the next logical step, after buying matching black t-shirts and posing like 90s rappers for their Facebook page, is to, of course, have their own podcast. Well, you know what? You're not going to find that crap here. What we have here at WBHM Digital Broadcasting is the best host, the best guest, bringing you real information. All of the hosts here on this network know their stuff. They are the people who have been out there doing the work, doing actual research. And no, by research, I don't mean binge watching some kind of cheesy TV show on Netflix. I mean reading books. I mean out in the field doing the legwork. And who are they interviewing on their shows? They're bringing you the people they have learned from. They're bringing you the best in the field, covering all kinds of topics from UFOs and aliens to Bigfoot to cryptozoology to ghosts to anything you can think of a bit strange and unexplained. It is here, and you're going to get the best information here. So stay tuned to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Don't go anywhere. Speaking of going somewhere, I've got to go before my mic gets cut. We'll see you there on WBHM-DB.
Welcome to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz. This is coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful downtown Birmingham, Alabama. And talking to you from my cute little tiny home near Pensacola, Florida. And we're talking about antiques and haunted furniture and dolls and, you know, the past living through items and articles. And I have tried to record this. I'm pre-recording this show today because I have to go work on my album tonight. And I've been trying to tell a story about a certain piece of haunted furniture, which my friend Teal knows what I'm talking about. And every time I talk about that piece of furniture or the story, it's a great story, but I can't tell it because the ghosts scratch on my recording. You can't hear what I'm saying over the scratching and the noise. So, and this is something we go through sometimes, especially with electronics. They can interfere when they don't want you to know the story. Now, I will tell about Teal's other stuff. I won't talk about this piece of furniture. I promise the ghost. I will just talk about the house, the haunted house that she has, because she has two houses. And her guests usually stay in one. And when I've been a guest there, I've been in the back. And at some points, you know, she collects memento mori, and sometimes she has it back there, sometimes in front, sometimes she has it loaned. So the back tends to be very haunted. And the way that memento mori is in the old days, you know, when people would die, you didn't always have photography, and then when it came into use, it was very expensive. And sometimes the only photograph someone would have is they'd have the funeral home would kind of offer, well, it wouldn't kind of. They'd say, do you want a photograph of your deceased? And you would get a photograph of the person. They would lay them on couches and try to make them look natural, or take the picture of them in their casket. So you have photography, which I have several examples of that myself. My mother's family took pictures of my uncle when he died in 1950, and they didn't think my grandmother was basically a Victorian/Edwardian, and that was normal. And so they took a picture of him, and I have pictures of him in my book, my second book, Chattanooga Chills, have the pictures of him and the story of my granny and her psychic event that led, up to his death. And, but the funeral home would offer all these services. Would you like a photograph? Would you like to have their hair turned into a brooch or a ring? Or would you like to have a memorial ring? Hence, memento mori, remember death. And you could have all sorts of different things made. And if your child had died, would you like a wax doll fixed to look like your child, and we'll put the hair on her and you can keep it and pretend it's your daughter, or it would be a way to keep your daughter close to you, or your child, your son, your child. There's several. They would do it for little boys and little girls. And the doll I have, that's exactly what happened. The mother had a doll made and kept it, and it helped her through the mourning process. And so you could have these things done at the funeral home. And so that's what Teal collects. Now, the house that she uses for her guests is where some of that lives. And I've been there. Now, I'm going to ask the spirits, please don't mess up with the recording. Let me tell this story. And so I would go and stay. I've been there several times. And the first time that I really was there, the spirits were just very excited, because someone could really see them. So the first thing that I remember happening, I was getting ready. It was in the morning. We were getting ready to go to breakfast. So I was in the bathroom grooming, like an animal does. And I heard someone go, yoo-hoo! And I had a grandparent who would do that. My grandfather would stick his head in the door and go, yoo-hoo! When he came in the house, let you know he's there. So I went, yoo-hoo! I'm in here. I'll be out just a second. And I went out, and it was into a darkened room. There was nobody. And the door was locked from the inside from me locking it, because I'm that way. I lock doors, put boards over them and everything else at night because I've had home invasions. So, where I used to live in the hood. And, so, I told them about that later. They thought that was funny. One time I was getting ready again and to go get together with them to go eat, and I was grooming once again, and I heard a party going on, and because it's the house is kind of like along kind of an L shape, and so there's a big long dining room, and it sounded like people talking, eating, laughing, clink clink, the typical haunted party. And I thought, what is that? And I looked out there, nobody. Again, because I had a habit of just walking through there without turning the big light on. So it's this dark room, and I thought, we got to start turning the lights on in this joint. And then one time I was sitting on my bed, on the side of the bed. I was putting on my shoes because we were getting ready to go to an event. And a dime, and I kid you not, a dime comes floating past my face, past my eyes, about 3 feet off the ground, and it just goes slowly past me, and it goes out the door into the darkened room, the dining room, and then I heard it go ching, like, it got thrown. And I'd always wondered how spirits got things anywhere. Did they just think it? Did they pick it up? Did they carry it? What did they do? Because I've had that experience, things disappearing and coming in other places, and they call that an apport. And so that's what it did. It was the spirit is an electromagnetic plasma, so it's an invisible plasma. And it just picked that dime up and was just carrying it very slowly past my face. I thought it was hysterical. And I was like, that is very cool. Thank you. And, it was cool, creepy, and fascinating. And later on, I think Barron found the dime later when he was cleaning. He goes, I did find it out there. And one time I was out there, we were going to an event, and Tui Snyder was staying there as well. So we had to go to bed very early, everybody, and try to get some sleep, because we had to get up early to do like a 2-hour drive. So I went into a very haunted room, and she was out in the dining room, which is super haunted. And all night long, noise, and I thought it was Tui, and I thought, Tui, go to sleep, Tui. And Tui was like, Mark, quit making noise, go to sleep. And she, the next day she complained to Teal about me, and I said, I complained about her, and it wasn't us, it was the ghost, and it was hysterical, because, the noise that they made, the room I was in, the door makes this horrible noise when you open it. It's like it gets stuck, and then it makes this and it would just keep making that noise, and the door was closed. And she thought I was doing it, and I thought she was doing it, and I thought it was pretty damn funny. But I didn't learn about that until later, after, all the things, and then, Tui was like, a little surprised, because that was actual spirit activity, and she just thought I was being noisy all night long. So you can see it's kind of funny how these things happen. And I get a hoot out of that, Now that place also, because it had the memento mori in it, a lot of that stuff has energy and spirits attached to it. Because, sometimes I tease her and say, you collect dead people's hair. And their hair, and because she does, she has this beautiful jewelry. And I've seen, really spectacular pieces, before, where they would take and braid them. And it's like, I do not understand how they got the braids as tiny as they were. But I'm the same way. I have several things that I've collected that are just exquisite. And I have a watch that I inherited from, that was my great uncle Chaz, and it is the most exquisite watch. He was given in 1890 as like a retirement thing, and I don't see how they made the tiniest little gold hand on it. There's this exquisite gold detailing in it. It's a gold watch, and but the face, the detail, the work, and you have to understand this is before electricity. How did they make these tiny, itsy bitsy tiny little pieces? Fascinating that people made more with less. And I also have another watch that is my great grandmother's watch. Her name was Justice, and very simple, good woman's watch from 1890s, and beautiful. But hers is really simple and beautifully made, and the man's watch is like the peacock. It is incredible, but the man's watch has, an energy with it. I have several things that I have that, besides the quilt, I've brought things home before that, you put them down, and, sometimes you even just put them down in their bag. You're going to look at them the next day, and you go try to go to bed, or activity happens. I've had one little antique thing that I had a long time ago. I bought a dress because I collect antique clothing as well. I wear antique clothing. I have several women's pieces, but just because of the embroidery or the detail, because we just don't do those anymore, not like what they used to. And there was this beautiful 50s pink dress, which later on I resold because it was a unique piece. And I got it for a song. And I brought it home, and I was taking it, really taking it apart, looking at it. And it was made by a place in Chattanooga at the time that specialized in evening gowns, and it was a beautiful pink taffeta gown from the 1955, 56, and I felt something when I was turning it inside out, and I didn't always go in and check them completely like that, and I reached in and I found this beautiful brooch that it is a crescent moon with a star, and it was huge, and it had been apparently used. She'd used it on the bosom because you could see where it had been pinned 60, at that time 30, 40 years ago, now 60 years ago, and there was the pin. She had stuck it inside the dress to keep track of it. And so I have that pin. So that night when I got that dress home, you could hear people walking around in my house. And I said, well, maybe we'll just sell this little dress. And so I did. I sold the dress. I kept the pin, but I didn't have any more activity. But the dress, yes, I did. But you could hear people shuffling around on the carpet. And it just very interesting. So you never know what you're going to pick up when you get antiques or, now it's, thrift store stuff. I love thrift stores. So I actually, here in Florida, the thrift stores are pretty cool. I found this tiny little Art Nouveau creamer that is so unique, and it has like a gardenia on it, and it's 120 years old probably, and it looks ultra modern, but it's an antique. I got it for nothing because I just didn't, for a few bucks. They didn't know what it was. They thought it was new, and I picked it up. It's like an RS Germany and piece, which that's old. But it looks so modern that you can't tell. So, I mean, but, I'm always grabbing something old. And antiques and just unusual things. So when you go to these thrift stores, now there have been things that I have started to pick up and started to buy, and I go, and my system will assess it and say, don't do that. Don't take that. And I will put it down. Because that's what my aura does. It will read the energy, and if my energy tells me then it's Now, one of my friends, Trent, he loves antiques, and when he comes down here, he grabs his car full. And he's got some gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous things. And he's got one or two pieces I would say are kind of haunted, but I don't tell him that. But when he was down here last time, he picked up this gigantic hand, a fortune teller hand. It's like 4 feet tall, made out of metal with all the fancy stuff on it. And, I'm like, you can find anything down here. There was one that I'd love to go to that closed because of COVID. Damn you, COVID. And it was called the Iron Gargoyle. And I loved going through it. It was like the old thrift stores and antique stores of the 60s. You would just go in piles and piles and piles of stuff. And you could go in with $20 and find something cool. And of course, COVID did away with a lot of antique stores because people were more, they couldn't go out. So if there were no customers, there's nobody buying antiques. And I got to experience that store. There were several stores that died. The Copper Possum and the Iron Gargoyle and just several beautiful little antique stores went under. And so in the last 2 years, and I keep waiting for someone to open new ones. I'm hoping one of my friends will open one. Because I want to go look and find more antiques. I want to go find more haunted stuff. I want to look through things. I want to find spooky crap. I want to find haunted dresses and haunted antiques and haunted dolls. And it's getting slim pickings. But they do have great thrift stores here. So I did one time walk into one. And found it was around Halloween time, and there was an anatomy for the study of anatomy. There was a anatomy small skeleton, and I bought it for $3, and they sell for $99. So that's if you have an eye, you can walk in, you can dress yourself in this place with very nice clothing. I mean, you can go find, designer clothes if you're careful. And not spend, for $20, you can go out looking spiffy. But, you got to remember, it might have something attached to it. And always clean whatever you get. And, just because if I buy a piece of clothing, honey, it gets boiled. And then before I put it on, it gets washed a couple of times, and then we're ready to go. But I'm mostly into shirts. I have a shirt fetish. And down here, oh my gosh, where I come from, it's still cold, and here it's like spring in March. So, but if you come to Florida, go to all the thrift stores. They are exciting. And go to, I'm not sponsored by these stores, but the Peacock and things like that. They have some very interesting things. They have gorgeous clothing. The dresses and stuff, are a little bit on the higher end, but they are gorgeous. So, if you come down, go look at any antique stuff. Go look at the thrift stores, since the thrift stores are taking the place of the antique stores now. So, do that, and you'll be surprised what you're going to find. But in a second, we're going to have to go to a commercial, and then we'll come to the last part of our show. So, all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Universal Truths with Mark Foltz, coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful downtown Birmingham, Alabama, and talking to you from my cute tiny home near Pensacola, Florida. Now tonight, we're finishing up our stories of haunted antiques and furniture and dolls and all sorts of stuff. And like I said, the last section we came from, I had to record it at least 5 times, because every time I tried to talk about a specific story from my dear friend T.L. Gray, thank you T.L., the ghosts would interfere and I couldn't get it recorded. So, and I asked, it just happens. So I couldn't tell that very interesting story. So somebody will have to get that story out of T.L. And I'm not even going to mention what the piece of furniture was, because every time I do, it does something weird. So it just doesn't want to be talked about. So, but that's a part of the charm of ghost stories. You never know what you're going to get, and it's very funny. And even though I got the last part recorded, you'll hear 2 or 3 little blips and jumps in it, and that was still the leftover of the spirits listening in, seeing if I was doing what I was promising, that I wasn't going to tell that story. And so there's some weird things that happen that didn't happen on the rest of the recording. So I think that's pretty funny. So, but yeah, I'm just a strange person. I've always loved this kind of stuff. When I was little, I remember when I was, had to be 4 or 5 years old. I remember the first horror movie I saw on TV. My parents were watching it, and it was called The Man Who Cheated Death. And I remembered from that time, for somehow I understood. He was talking about, getting, he was getting organs. He had this thing where he would remove specific glands from girls, and he would turn that into a serum that kept him alive. It was a very weird movie, but I remember that. That was the first horror movie I remember watching, and I kind of got the concept. And at being at 4 or 5 years old, I was like, "Oh, okay, that's wild." And I was understanding things in the movie that I didn't know that I understood. Like when he was talking about how old, there was like a carving. He was like centuries old, and he was talking about this really old carved lamb or something he had carved, and I thought, "Ooh, that's so old," And I thought, I didn't know what old was then. I was fascinated with antiques anyway. And I grew up fascinated by the antiques my mother inherited from her sister that she took care of. And they were beautiful. And I have a few of those. They inspired me. There's a compote that it has green mint all over it, and it's cobalt, and it's kind of like a Majolica ceramic porcelain, very brightly colored, very beautifully painted compote. And it inspired me to investigate antiques. And so by the time I was 11 or 13, I was kind of knowledgeable about stuff, what I was looking for. And like I said, there were beautiful, wonderful antique and junk stores that, if I were being raised now, I would be fascinated with the thrift stores and the antique stores I could get to. But these were within walking range, and I walked to them all the time. And I just had the best time. But I learned about history by looking at these things, and there was no internet. So if you wanted to look at an antique, you had to go get books. So I was always reading. I was reading about, I collected at the time what they call dragonware. The first antique I really bought that I went, this is an antique, I want to invest in this, was a dragonware vase that had a lot of blue in it. It was gorgeous. It had like this sand painting of a dragon on it, and I bought it for $15 at a huge flea market they used to have in Collinsville. They probably still do, near Chattanooga, and about an hour away from Chattanooga. It's in Collinsville. I guess it's Tennessee. And I bought it for $15, and it was worth like $150. That's, how I was kind of savvy at that age, and I got it from looking at these antiques. And so when I look at the antiques, I look at the antiques for their age, what I love. I don't collect them now for money because I don't really have money to spend on antiques. So if I get an antique, it has to be within my range, which is not a big budget. So that's why we go thrift storing and looking. And I still find beautiful, strange, incredible buys and bargains. And flea markets and yard sales are a great place to go. And if you're looking for haunted items, it's a great place to go. And antique stores have more possibility of haunted because they are housing very old things specifically. And I mean, it's you're looking at old furniture. You're looking at the items. Like I said before, wood was alive at one time, so it holds a vibration of its own, and then too, it's a kind of a porous material, so it will accept vibration, your vibration, their vibration, whatever energy, And in the old days, people cleaned things all the time, and so they put their energy and touched it and oiled it and put their hands in their energy, and they embedded their energy into it. Dolls, you can find dolls everywhere, and it doesn't have to be an old doll to be haunted. Or to have a consciousness, and they may not just be haunted. It doesn't have to have a ghost to haunt it. It can have a consciousness from the person holding it and embedding their consciousness into it. So you can find dolls and things that have energy that are not specifically ghost-oriented. The ones that I collect, they have to talk to me. And my aura, I look at them, and if I hear or feel something from it, then I know, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. But I love broken things, and that's another thing. I like to rescue broken items, because a lot of times you'll find these things that people broke 100 years ago, and they glued it and they kept it. They loved it. They wanted to keep it. So sometimes a well-loved piece is broken. I knew somebody who was rich, and she would only buy something if it were perfect. And then she was a hoarder, and she wouldn't see it again. She would shove it in a pile of junk, and she had a house full of junk that thousands of dollars of stuff. And she never looked at it. She just would hoard it and buy it, and it had to be perfect. And she had all these museum-quality dolls. She would buy them, take them home, and collectors would have died if they'd seen what she would do with these dolls. And so whoever inherited, she left her stuff to some country people, and they probably took them dolls and sold them, at the yard sale. They wouldn't have known what they were, and she was buying these, $2,000 and $3,000 dolls, to impress the people at the doll club. And as soon as they got home, they got stuffed in a bag and stuffed in God knows where. So, and she didn't want anyone to have anything that, she didn't, so she would have made sure they went somewhere nice, somebody who understood them. But she would collect beautiful antiques. She bought antiques from me, and I know where they went. They were right into the in the garbage pile that she had called her home, and she had $3 or $4 million, easy. And she was, But when I had yard sales, where I was at, she'd come and buy beautiful little antiques I had, because I had some pretty things. But I would tell her, I said, I love chipped and broken. I don't care. If it attracts me, I don't care if it's broken or there. It has character. And I have several haunted dolls that people didn't want because they weren't perfect. But boy, they had character. They had the energy. They had their talk. So, don't be put off by something that's not perfect. As a matter of fact, if it's been dragged down the hill a few times, that means it has some living. And that's what causes these things. The energy from living is embedded in these items. So you look at it for that. And don't be put off that it's not perfect. And actually, that makes things more affordable sometimes. People, if it's not perfect, sometimes they'll sell it cheaper, and you get a find for nothing. Or, or even if it's expensive, if it's broken. People nowadays, even if it's broken, they'll try and sell it for above retail. And you got to watch that. But you can find gorgeous antique dolls that have energy, have life to them, But, maybe it's only the head. So, get the head. Find an antique body. Marry them together. But make sure, and sometimes the body will have the energy, and you'll find a head to put on it. And there's a great place to look for antique dolls called the Internet. And you can look on Etsy, eBay, Ruby Lane, any of those. And it doesn't have to be a whole doll. The heads can be very haunted. The bodies can be very haunted. And I've gotten gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous finds and dolls all over the place. But I find them, they come to me. And if it's meant for me, that's all there is. If it's meant for me and I'm meant for them, that's it. It's just going to happen. Whether I have the ability to get them or not. And there are dolls that I have looked at in antique pieces. I'll put a bid, and I'm like, I don't have $20, so I'll bid $10. And I've won things like that. If it was meant for me, it just meant for me, and nobody else wanted it. And so, if you're interested in that kind of thing, there are plenty of that out there. But be prepared. You have to be prepared. These are energies, and sometimes they have their opinions and their characters and their personalities. So be prepared. It's not simple. Now, and antiques, good luck with that. But always remember, if it's weird, you can always cleanse it, and if it's not dealable. Now, if anyone wants to meet me personally, I work at Live and Let Live Metaphysical Store in Pensacola at 4622 Softlyfield Road. Sal Kaddafa owns the store. Matthew Ferguson helps him run it. There's my protege, Tia. I call her Tia. Shauna Tia Alexis. She's a great reader. There's Terry O'Connor. She has many years of experience, and there's Will Rosasco, who's moved back to Florida, and he's charming and has ages and ages and ages of doing this. Me and him are about the same age, even though he looks like a baby. And then there's me. So if you want to come see me, call in about 24 hours ahead of time. Make sure I'm going to be there, and say I'm from the radio. Call Mark. Make sure he can come in if he can, and then if I can, I will. So now we have to end this show. So thank you for listening. Thank you for coming. And to all of you out there in the dark, good night. Good night.